On August 18, 2025, France woke up to a disturbing piece of news that soon crossed borders and spread across news outlets around the world. Jean Pormanove, the stage name of Raphael Gravin, a 46-year-old streamer, had died during a live broadcast after nearly 10 days of marathon streaming on the Kik platform. The camera showed him lying under a blanket, apparently asleep, while his fellow streamers tried to wake him up without success. Thousands of users watched in disbelief, wondering if it was part of a show or if they were really witnessing something irreversible. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Jean Pormanove's story is more than just another streamer in the digital universe. It is also a symbol of the excesses of an industry that, in its eagerness to retain audiences, allows human dignity to become a spectacle and the line between the virtual and the real to blur to the point of tragedy. This issue caused surprise and alarm in France, triggering outrage that reached the highest levels of government. The authorities opened a judicial investigation, and the media began to expose what was happening behind the cameras. What appeared to be a sad, isolated case was actually just the tip of a much darker iceberg. Mistreatment, public humiliation, and abusive dynamics had been turned into content, creating a digital spectacle of cruelty, broadcast live, and monetized by platforms. And who was that man who ended up being exposed so brutally in front of millions? How does someone become the unwilling protagonist of a global circus of humiliation? What responsibility do the other streamers who surrounded him and subjected him to constant humiliation have? How far does the responsibility of the platforms that allowed these broadcasts go? What role does the audience play, since their consent supports creating this content? Welcome to the case of Jean Pormanove, the streamer who died humiliated live. Before we continue, we want to stress that this case is ongoing, so new information may appear that expands or even contradicts what is known so far and what is being reported in this video. If you're interested in the topic and want to stay up to date with the news, you can write streamer in the comments. Now let's get started. Before making headlines in France and worldwide, Jean Pormanove was just Raphael Gravin, a 46-year-old man who had found on the internet a place to express himself and, over time, a source of recognition. Like so many others, he started in the 2020s with simple broadcasts, video game sessions, improvised talks, and small bits of humor that were shared on platforms like TikTok, Twitch, and Instagram. Initially, his content wasn't especially remarkable. He was an ordinary man who streamed enthusiastically without the big productions or fancy equipment of famous streamers. But what set him apart was something less tangible, his open and even naive personality, which made him a striking figure within a competitive and fierce ecosystem. The real turning point came when Raphael moved to Kik, the streaming platform partly funded by online betting companies and aiming to challenge giants like Twitch. Kik offers greater freedom to creators, and in return, it became a space where extreme, controversial, or outright violent formats proliferate, which would be quickly censored elsewhere. There, Raphael took the stage name Jean Pormanove and began gaining notoriety. His unstructured and sometimes absurd broadcasting style again caught attention and put him in the mass public spotlight. However, what truly catapulted him was his role within a group of French streamers who had found a particular niche, turning humiliation into entertainment. In that circle, Maneuver appeared as the perfect target. He was insulted, ridiculed, and faced physical challenges on camera. From point-blank paintball shots to episodes where they pretended to strangle him. Everything was broadcast live, earning applause, laughter, and thousands of comments from a growing weekly audience. That image of a tragic clown turned him into a phenomenon. In 2024, Jean Pormanove became one of the most watched streamers on Kik, but that exposure came at a price. What was fun for the audience became a huge physical and psychological strain for Raphael. The business of Moro. To understand what happened with Jean Pormanove, it's not enough to talk about his personal life or his broadcasts. It's necessary to look at the phenomenon he was part of. A digital ecosystem that made humiliation, violence, and abuse products for mass consumption. In recent years, platforms like Kick started to host increasingly extreme formats. The logic is simple: the more shocking the content, the bigger the audience, and with it, the higher the income. In that environment, some groups of streamers found a macabre formula for success, turning one person's vulnerability into a spectacle for everyone. Jean Pormanove became the centerpiece of that machine. In the streams, his role was to be the epicenter of all the jokes. The man endured insults, blows, dangerous challenges, and physical or psychological humiliations. What happened in front of the camera somehow resembled the Roman Colosseums, where the crowd demanded more blood, more violence, and more spectacle. This time, there were no gladiators or lions, just a real man, in front of a camera and thousands of users watching online, participating with just a click. In December 2024, the French investigative outlet Mediapart exposed what was happening behind those broadcasts. Their articles revealed that it wasn't just simple jokes or consensual humor, but rather systematic violence against a person who might have needed help. The report spoke of practices such as physical assaults, simulated strangulation, constant psychological pressure, and the dissemination of humiliating images, all broadcast live to tens of thousands of viewers. According to the collected testimonies, Jean did not always participate freely, but was pushed by the group dynamic and the demands of an audience that kept asking for more. The revelation was so overwhelming that in January 2025, the Nice prosecutor's office launched a preliminary investigation into two of the most influential streamers in that group, Owen Naruto Senasandoti and Safin Hamadi. Both were accused of group violence against vulnerable people and of distributing violent images. The individuals were detained for a few hours but were quickly released, which left a sense of impunity. The machinery kept running, the streams continued, the audience didn't leave, and Jean Pormanove, far from being rescued, became even more exposed as the visible face of that entertainment. The analysts then began to talk about the business of mistreatment, a system where the exploitation of human suffering becomes a profitable spectacle, justified by the excuse that the audience demands it and sustained by the lack of effective regulations in the digital sphere. In that context, Jean Pormanove agreed to join a streaming marathon. The goal was simple: to endure until the end, with no real rest, no breaks to recover, broadcasting every moment as a continuous spectacle. No one imagined, or maybe they did, that after almost 300 hours of streaming, he would end up dead. And that's how our story goes back to the beginning. The last marathon. From the start, the livestream had a rather chaotic vibe. Laughter, shouting, and jokes created a euphoric mood that hid what was happening underneath. The pressure on Jean Pormanove to once again endure the role of a human punching bag. As the clock ticked, he could be seen receiving physical challenges, shoves, and comments that bordered on humiliation. As hours passed, Jean Pormanove showed signs of extreme exhaustion. Witnesses say he looked disoriented, his movements increasingly clumsy, and his gaze lost. Some viewers even commented in the chat that something wasn't right, but the logic of the live stream didn't stop. At a key moment, after 280 hours, Jean Pormanove fell asleep. While he was covered, someone mentioned that he was in a strange position. When his companions tried to wake him by throwing bottles, they saw, as many had warned, that Jean Pormanove was not just asleep. The scene was confusing. At first it seemed like part of the show, an exaggerated joke. Then the lack of reaction set off the alarm. The sudden silence in the broadcast contrasted with the hours of previous bustle. The camera captured the anguish of those present, the confusion, the desperate attempts to revive him. Some streamers nervously tried to go on, as if downplaying the situation. Others looked visibly scared. What became clear is that Jean Pormanove collapsed in front of everyone and never got back up. Hours later, French media confirmed what many witnessed live. Jean Pormanove had died. The news spread quickly on social media, causing shock and an immediate debate about the limits of digital entertainment. The Nice prosecutor's office, already investigating Pormanove's circle for abuse, has now added his death to the case. Meanwhile, the Kick platform reacted lukewarmly. Some recordings of the broadcast were deleted, but the event had already been replicated, downloaded, and shared on multiple sites. The audience that had been there recounted what they had seen, and the images became brutal evidence of how far the pursuit of spectacle can go. John Pormanove's last marathon wasn't just another livestream. It was the breaking point, the moment when entertainment turned into tragedy in front of thousands of witnesses. Social debate. On August 19, 2025, Canadian rapper Drake and American streamer Aiden Ross said they would pay for Jean's funeral. The media on their part were divided. Some saw Pormanove as a victim of digital exploitation, while others viewed him as seeking fame at any cost, ignoring the risks. The overall tone was outrage. A young man had died live before thousands of viewers. The Nice prosecutor's office also launched investigations to determine the results. Was there negligence on the part of the companions who encouraged him to take part in an extreme challenge? Could it be said they deliberately exploited him? And what role did the platform itself play, which allowed the broadcast without intervening? On Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, the name Jean Pormanove became a trending topic. Millions of users shared clips from the fateful broadcast, along with messages of sadness and reflection. Others, however, trivialized the event with memes and ironic comments that turned the serious incident into secondary entertainment, consumed and forgotten as quickly as any other viral content. Ultimately, the tragedy of Jean Pormanove not only caused shock, but also brought to the forefront a topic that had been on the agenda for some time, although not with enough strength: the regulation of content on live streaming platforms. On one hand, there are those who argue that platforms should not censor creators, since each viewer is free to choose what to watch and what not to watch. On the other hand, there are those who call for greater intervention, arguing that allowing broadcasts of violence or degradation is not freedom of expression, but rather the exploitation of human vulnerability. The line between both arguments became blurred, but Jean's death tipped the balance toward those demanding stricter controls. Another aspect that came to light was that of algorithms. These systems are designed to maximize the visibility of content that generates more interactions. They had amplified Jean's image. The more he was ridiculed, the more attention he got. The more extreme the situation was, the more views it attracted. The system itself seemed to reward degradation. In that sense, the case raised a troubling question. Are algorithms neutral, or are they programmed to favor sensationalism and controversy? After the tragedy, French lawmakers and digital rights organizations began to call for changes. Ultimately, the case exposed an uncomfortable reality. Society easily consumes content, not out of concern for the person, but for the spectacle. Turned into a mirror, it reflects the excesses of a digital era where entertainment can border on the inhuman. All that's left is to remember that Jean Pormanove was still Raphael Graven, a real man with a mother he wrote desperate messages to. A man with a body that was beginning to feel the cost of living under a show that was consuming him. A man for whom justice is being demanded today.